This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Thank you for watching this week's NC Spin. We promise to make it worth your while, beginning with several issues related to health care, especially a proposal that looks like expanding Medicaid, but sponsors say it isn't. Well, we also want to consider several energy issues, especially who's going to pay for the cleanup of all that coal ash that's been ordered. And as always, we ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Speaking of our panel, this week they include Howard Lee, former state senator, former utilities commissioner, former cabinet secretary, on and on and on and on. Chris Fitzsimon, the director of the Newsroom, John Hood, syndicated columnist and author, and Becki Gray, vice president of the John Locke Foundation. We begin our uninterrupted debate after these brief messages from our underwriters.
More than 2 million North Carolinians, including 435,000 children, live in areas where they can't buy healthy food. We can do better than this. Learn how we can improve access to healthy food at ncallianceforhealth.org.
They're up before dawn and work late into the night. They believe in hard work, family, and doing the right thing. They stand up for their communities when others walk away. They're good people who just want a fair shake. They are farmers. At North Carolina Farm Bureau, we are proud to stand with our farmers.
Today's tools make you a real DIYer, and as a member of an electric cooperative, you have lots of valuable tools to help you do it yourself in controlling your home energy use and budget, leaving you free to be Dad.
Partners for Innovation in Healthcare. We're supporting common sense solutions for North Carolina's healthcare delivery system, promoting access, affordability, quality care, and innovation. Visit us on the web at pihc.info.
Production underwriting provided by the North Carolina Academy of Family Physicians. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life. Let's get to it. It's been several weeks since we discussed health care on our show, and there's a backlog of issues that deserve debate, so let's begin with the subject of Medicaid expansion. Governor Cooper's made this one of his top priorities for this legislative session, but the legislature has refused to expand as many as 300,000 potential recipients. This week, the House rolled out a proposal that looks like, feels like, but they say isn't Medicaid expansion. Becki Gray, Republicans are calling it a low-income health plan, whereby a private insurance plan would be managed by Medicaid providers. Recipients would be required to pay premiums of 2% of their incomes, and there would be work requirements for those who receive the benefits. What's your opinion of this proposal?
Well, I agree with you. I think this is Medicaid expansion. If you add people to the Medicaid rolls, I'm not quite sure how you can argue it's not Medicaid expansion. But Tom, I think the real issue here is we're talking about the wrong thing. I think that everyone can agree, everyone on Jones Street and the governor's mansion agrees that health care costs are growing at unsustainable rates. Because of that, the cost of health insurance is also going up, putting it out of reach for many North Carolina families. So the question is, what are you going to do about that?
Well, you wrote a good column about this.
Thank you.
I want to go into this a little later on, if you don't mind. Let's stick with this Medicaid proposal to start off with, Howard. Becki says it's Medicaid expansion. They say it's not.
It's Medicaid expansion with some caveats. Okay. Let me say that. And the caveats are that they would pay a 2%, recipients would receive a 2% premium, and there would be a work requirement with it. But, you know, when you're looking at these programs, I mean, often what the governor's proposing is it's not 300,000 people that would be added to the rolls. It's 600,000 people. And keep in mind, 2.5 million North Carolinians are already receiving Medicaid. Half the babies born in North Carolina, Tom, are born under Medicaid. We are just transitioning into this managed care model for Medicaid. news reports this week have described it as messy at best. Our state auditor has just come out with another audit that brings some financial...
You are just determined to get me ahead of myself here, aren't you?
This is an important issue, and there's a lot to talk about.
Well, let's take it a piece at a time. All right, so the House says it's going to cover 543,000 people. It's going to cost $4.7 billion. The feds will fund 90% of it. But if for some reason or another Congress determined that they were going to drop their funding or reduce their funding, as originally they said they were going to do, the whole deal goes away. After you've given people benefits like this, can you take them away, Howard?
I think that's tough. I really do believe that when we raise expectations, especially around something like health care and people become to depend on it, you cannot back away without having some real casualties left in the past. So I hope that we're doing something that is solidly based and that it can be sustained over time.
Chris, former governor, Ohio Governor John Kasich was in North Carolina recently for Rural Day and made a great speech. We won't get into all of it. But he encouraged North Carolina to expand Medicaid because of the effects and results that they had seen in Ohio. The North Carolina Healthcare Association says this House proposal makes sense to them, common sense, they say. We've been subsidizing other states, as Governor Cooper has told us. Cooper says he would consider this House proposal. Democrats, however, aren't so impressed. Why?
Well, I think we'll start from the beginning. I think it's good that we're at least arguing now about how to provide health care coverage to a lot of people that don't have it. Not only did John Kasich expand Medicaid in Ohio, as I mentioned on the show every time we talk about this, radical liberals like Mike Pence, when he was governor of Indiana, expanded Medicaid because it just makes sense to figure out an organized way to provide people with health care insurance. There are some concerns about the premiums, about the work requirements. Interestingly, some of the states that have Medicaid have added work requirements. There was a study recently out of Arkansas that showed 4 out of 5 people were already working when they instituted work requirements, but there was a 25% drop in people covered because the bureaucracy created was too cumbersome. With people that work part-time, that work 30 hours one week and 50 hours the next week, somehow had different paperwork to fill out. The goal in Arkansas, I think, was to have Medicaid expansion, and then they imposed work requirements to make it harder for people to actually get Medicaid. We sort of need to decide what the goal is. I agree we need to reduce health care costs. But I also think one of the goals is figuring out a way where people have access to basic health care that keeps them healthier, that doesn't cost us all a whole bunch of money, that doesn't burden the hospitals when they show up. It's just common sense, which is why Mike Pence and John Kasich and Asa Hutchinson, the Republican governor of Arkansas, who ran as part of his re-election campaign on keeping Medicaid expansion. So it's not as simple as we're saying.
Back to North Carolina, let's assume this thing passes the House. What's the Senate going to do with it? We're hearing noises from over on the Senate side of the legislature that it's a non-starter.
Oh, I think as it heads across the legislature from the House to the Senate, it's possible it'll get lost in some file folder somewhere. It might be, dropped on the floor
it's
and
called
accidentally.
The Senate Rules Committee, I think.
I don't think it'll happen, but I think that the fundamental issue here is the Affordable Care Act was mostly a Medicaid expansion. We typically think about the exchanges and there was litigation about the exchanges. This is primarily expanding Medicaid. That was an irresponsible decision in 2009 in the very first place to do this at all. But once you do it, it creates this perverse incentive for states to go into a system where fairly well off people, health-wise, not income-wise, people who are fairly healthy, have a 90% federal match. People who are disabled have a 2/3 federal match. That is not going to survive in the long run. And I agree with Howard. When, not if, the federal government changes the funding formula, North Carolina will not back out of coverage if it does this.
Becki, now I want to get to your column because it was you had like 12 different ways that we could
instead of
Medicaid
costs. Expansion, here are some options.
Yeah,
right.
And so far as it goes, you talked about those. How are they going to have a net effect of reducing costs? Like, for instance, repealing certificate of need.
Right. And it's not just one thing that would work. It's a whole package of things that have to be considered. And not only are we talking about the cost of health care, but we're also talking about access to health care. If you have health insurance but you can't get to a doctor or a doctor won't see you, that doesn't really help you. So this is, it's more than just do you have health insurance. So a lot of those things that we're considering, and the General Assembly, to John's point about is this bill going to die in the Senate's not just saying no. The Senate is putting forward some proposals that would be more along the lines of reducing the cost of health care and insurance, and it's things like association health plans, so that groups like the Farm Bureau, the North Carolina Realtors, North Carolina Retail Merchants could go together and come up with plans that they could offer to their association so that people would have options that they could afford rather than having to take what is covered under Medicaid.
That's a nice segue, Howard. Association health plans. Small businesses pay between 6 and 18% more for health insurance than large corporations. You've been a small businessman most of your life. These association health plans have been touted as a good way to be able to help them in reducing their, in providing insurance, first of all, but then reducing their cost also. But a judge ruled that these things were not past muster constitutionally, and that what they were going to do in effect was, it was an end run around ACA, and it was going to essentially was going to mute the benefits of the Affordable Care Act. It said it was unconstitutional.
I thought that was an unfortunate decision because having been in a small business person and recognizing the high cost of health care, that was one way that I determined years ago that we could afford to provide coverage for our employees. I think these association plans have a lot of positive benefit. They may need some tweaking here and there, but overall, I'm very supportive of the idea of moving in that direction, allowing associations to take this on. Yeah,
President Trump jumped on this, and also another judge's ruling that the Affordable Care Act was unconstitutional. Obviously, from the get-go, he said he wanted to repeal and replace Obamacare, John. So far as it goes, he wants to use this, go all the way to the Supreme Court just to get the Affordable Care Act declared unconstitutional. How well do you think he might be able to fare in that pursuit?
I think that the original case that got to the court, I guess in 2012, was a much better case. I think the Supreme Court messed it up. I think John Roberts retroactively rewriting the bill to make it constitutional was an outrageous decision, and they should have thrown out a big chunk of the Affordable Care Act years ago. This particular lawsuit is arguing that because the mandate went away, all the other pieces go away. For one thing, I don't think that has anything to do with the Medicaid piece, even if the argument was to succeed. I'm not, as a critic of the Affordable Care Act that wants to repeal, replace, I am not sanguine about the possibility of the Supreme Court moving in that direction based on this case.
I want to move over to another health care issue that we really haven't had a chance to talk about on the show much before. State Treasurer Dale Folwell has been at loggerheads with the hospitals in North Carolina. He operates a state health plan, 700,000 members. He's trying to cut the cost, and he's asked the hospitals for a breakdown of what they charge for each procedure that they do. Didn't get it. Then he turned around and said, well, okay, in that case, I'm going to tell you what the state health plan is going to pay for these various procedures. Well, that just set everything off. The Scenic jumped in and said they agree with the treasurer. So now the House has gotten involved, and they want to pass a provision, law that says he cannot implement these new cost reductions. What's your take on all this so far, Chris?
Well, it's fascinating. I don't think most people would be against.
I mean, it's high drama.
Well,
this
is high drama.
television.
I don't think most people are against transparency, but I think what's happening is that Treasurer Folwell, whatever you think of him, I think is he's working for the state health plan as the head of the state health plan. That's his sort of what he's looking at. But you can't look at one aspect of the healthcare system and take all the money out of that, for example. I think the hospitals feel like they would be unfairly penalized and they'd have to shift costs and do a bunch of other things, which sort of gets to the whole point of everybody in the healthcare industry, everybody in the healthcare world has a vested stake in it. And the hard part is getting all these people at the table, because if you let one person get at the table and get their way, it has a ripple effect all the way down the road. Obviously here, it's the hospital association, but a lot of people will be impacted by that.
Example A of that is small rural hospitals, Becki. I mean, many of them are teetering anyway, so far as viability is concerned. So the treasurer came out and said, okay, I'm going to increase the amount of reimbursements that I'm going to give to small rural hospitals, a sweetener of sorts. Is that going to make it more palatable?
Well, it certainly seems like it should. I mean, that's what you hear from the hospitals. We mentioned earlier about certificate of need, talking about Medicaid expansion, now the state health plan. You know, the response from the hospitals is always, well, this will hurt rural hospitals. And I think, you know, somebody needs to take a real look at that, and we need to protect health care and access and rural administration of health care, whether that is whether the model moving forward might look different than that. But in this whole state health plan, Tom, this is really about the numbers. The state treasurer has an obligation that the General Assembly gave him to administer the state health plan. And there's three numbers that are important in this: 4%, 4 years, and 700,000. The state health plan is funded 4%. It is going to run out of money in 4 years, and 700,000 state employees depend on the state health plan for their state health care. Something has to be done. It has to be done pretty quickly.
I think everybody agrees with that. As far as it goes, let's look at this thing from a macro perspective, Howard. Politically, you've been hanging around politics for quite a while here. It looks to me like, to a certain extent, Falwell has put the legislature in sort of a vice in many respects. They either got to fully fund the state health plan, or they got to go along with his efforts to cut costs. Am I right about that?
Well, I certainly, yes, and I certainly admire the treasurer for taking this on, because it's a tough nut to crack, but he's at least trying to put something on the table that people can consider and make a determination of. I really am concerned that if we go too far, we could end up hurting more people than we help. But I just find it unconscionable that intelligent people on both sides, the legislature and everywhere else, can't sit around a table and come up with a reasonable plan.
John, they just keep wanting to point fingers and find bad guys. And I'm not sure I see bad guys in this scenario. Do you?
Maybe not bad guys, but I do think that we should not fool ourselves about what is at stake here. Ultimately, healthcare costs too much because healthcare providers are paid more than they're paid in most other places in the world. It's really not any more complicated than that. It's not because we don't have preventive care that doesn't save money. It's not for all sorts of other reasons that people make up. It is simply, if you go into other countries, whether they have a single payer system or a private system, the health providers are paid less, particularly hospitals. Now, we can get to a more reasonable cost for a procedure at a hospital. We can get to a more reasonable and predictable number through more competition and so forth, which I like. Or you could have, if you already got a large third-party payer like state health plan, they can make some decisions on behalf of their employees. But you got to choose a path. The path is not preserve the current system and throw more people into it, throw more money into it. That's not the path that leads to the answer.
Well, I think we all agree something needs to happen so far as the funding and administration of the state health plan is concerned. I want to go around the table really quickly. How's this war going to end up, Chris? Who wins? Who loses?
I don't think anything's going to happen this legislative session. I think we'll continue to discuss this, but I do think it's important. I think Treasurer Falwell, another idea would be to take some of these cost-cutting measures with the hospitals and demand that his Republican colleagues fund the state health plan more prominently when they're making budget.
Well, that's what I say.
Right, but he hasn't done that as much. He hasn't pounded the table nearly as much, saying you had cut taxes $3.5 billion. What if you cut it $3.2 billion and spent $300 million more every year on the state health plan?
Yeah. What do you think's going to happen, Howard?
I think I would bet at this juncture on the treasurer. I think he has a bully pulpit and he's using it effectively. I don't think he's totally right, but at the same time, I believe he can force some people to come think about this at the table.
Becki, what's going to happen?
I think this discussion will continue. I think there will be some sort of compromise reached, but I think that it's critical that something be done.
John?
I think that both sides are saying the other side needs to come to the table. But I think that the hospitals don't yet understand the pressure that they are under politically in terms of public opinion, and that they need to come to the table seriously, not just as an attempt to kill the idea.
I think they get it. I mean, they're running.
I'm not sure they're entirely
They're running advertising campaigns and so forth like that. But I personally don't know that I think that there are any bad guys in this scenario, just people with differences of opinion.
Everybody in the healthcare system works to be paid. They ought to. We need a system that allows the value and the payment to get aligned better. That's as simple as that.
Let me switch topic. Gas prices at the pump have risen pretty recently, a lot. If you've been there, you've noticed it. And it's not just in anticipation of the Easter holiday. We want dependable but cheap energy, and there are several current issues surrounding that topic. At one time, it was thought we would exhaust our supplies of fossil fuels to power our cars and electricity, and that we were going to need wind and solar energy. Howard, there have been major expansions of clean energy, but they've also gathered plenty of detractors who believe these efforts, especially solar, has ended up raising prices to consumer. You wrote a good column that we posted on our website What's all of the negativity about solar?
Well, I think one of the problems is the work of PURPA, the Public Regulatory Act of
Passed
1978.
in the Jimmy Carter administration.
The Jimmy Carter administration, and as Secretary of Natural Resources, I was engaged in that. And I think that that's an organization that needs to be relooked at, reevaluated, and determine its value going forward, because it's discouraging a lot of the development because of cost. And so I'd like to see us spend more time recognizing we have to have multiple sources of energy, and that is one direction we could move.
Becki, one of the critics, a lot of the critics on solar are saying part of what they don't like is that the energy companies like Duke are required to sign long-term contracts, as much as 20 years, and guarantee to purchase the electricity that is generated from this, and have no chance whatsoever to be able to adjust the rates. Now, what's happened is that the cost of solar production has gone down pretty dramatically. Is this a federal responsibility for them to be able to renegotiate these contracts, or can the state do it?
Well, the state can do it, and I mean, these are those PURPA contracts, and I forget what that acronym stands for, but that's what Senator Lee was talking about. Those have been looked at in North Carolina. We can change those. North Carolina has some of the most generous contract requirements that the utility company has to comply with these alternative energy companies that is driving up the cost. And so the General Assembly is looking at that, making some of those changes. But, you know, another problem with this are the subsidies that the solar and the renewable energy folks are getting, not only federally, but here in the state. And so when you heavily subsidize one area, then, you know, it may drive the cost down because the government's picking up the rest of it. And so it distorts the energy market. We ought to back off all of that stuff and just look for the cheapest, most efficient source that we can.
Are we still committed to having clean energy? Do we worry as much about fossil fuels today as we have? Certainly these gas prices are a result of increases, or recently a result of something. I saw $4 at the pump being predicted before too long this summer.
Well, shockingly, when prices go up, people do more exploration to bring more product to market, which then drives the prices down. But then when that doesn't happen long enough, the prices go up. This is a market, is going to continue to be a market. We're never going to suddenly run out of fossil fuels. That's a silly, silly idea. The price would go up so high before that happens that the transition would occur.
Well, I hope we don't get any silly ideas when I ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Chris Fitzsimon, let's start with you.
Well, we talked a lot about health care on this program. I think it's worth noting that expanding Medicaid is very popular in North Carolina. Republicans in Washington are very worried about the Trump administration's effort to repeal the Affordable Care Act using the Supreme Court. Whatever you think of health care, it is the people of the country and North Carolina generally support the Affordable Care Act and support Medicaid expansion. These are political troubled waters for Republicans.
Interesting. Howard Lee, tell us something we don't know.
You know, we didn't get into education, but for years I've traveled around the country and gotten great accolades about North Carolina being a gem of higher education. Traveling around in some of those same circles.
Would that be Jim Hunt, Jim Martin, or never mind, go ahead.
But in recent years, recent days traveling around, I'm getting a different opinion of a lot of people who are seeing our higher education system being somewhat tarnished based on all of the activity that has occurred.
Interesting. And I think there are a lot of people who are wondering about the governance structure we got over there. Becki Gray, tell us something we don't know.
Well, just to follow up a little bit with that, there was a conference held at UNC Chapel Hill this week that was a joint conference with Duke. It was touted as being an update on Gaza. It turned out to be on the situation in Gaza.
Oh, okay.
It ended up being bashing of Israel, very anti-Semitic, making fun, ridiculing Jewish people. This was attended by hundreds of students, administrators, and professors, endorsed by the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Also this week, they're turned up in the library, some anti-Semitic posters and flyers in the library. This is very troubling. There was a video posted on Facebook from someone reporting on this. Very, very troubling. I understand that there is an investigation going on at Chapel Hill, but this is something that, you know, we need to have open discussions on our campuses, but this goes way beyond the pale.
John, tell us something we don't know.
U.S. News & World Report just issued its top 20 best cities list. I'm somewhat dubious of some of these things, but this one is a little bit higher quality. It uses a lot of different variables. Interesting, North Carolina has 3 of the top 20 cities. That's the most of any state in the union. So I think we can expect more people to be moving to North Carolina if they're reading online best cities lists.
We like those best of lists when we're in there. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, sign up for our free weekly email newsletter, Spin Cycle. Give your feedback and read my weekly column. Visit our website, our newly redesigned website, ncspin.com, or catch us on Facebook. And join us next week when we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
More than 2 million North Carolinians, including 435,000 children, live in areas where they can't buy healthy food. We can do better than this. Learn how we can improve access to healthy food at ncallianceforhealth.org.
They're up before dawn and work late into the night. They believe in hard work, family, and doing the right thing. They stand up for their communities when others walk away. They're good people who just want a fair shake. They are farmers. At North Carolina Farm Bureau, we are proud to stand with our farmers.
Today's tools make you a real DIYer, and as a member of an electric cooperative, you have lots of valuable tools to help you do it yourself in controlling your home energy use and budget, leaving you free to be Dad.
Partners for Innovation in Healthcare. We're supporting common sense solutions for North Carolina's healthcare delivery system, promoting access, affordability, quality care, and innovation. Visit us on the web at pihc.info.
Production underwriting provided by the North Carolina Academy of Family Physicians. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.